So if you're a relatively new knitter, you might have heard people talking about American versus continental knitting. So I wanted to show you the difference and then suggest to you why there are reasons you might want to learn continental. So first of all, American, or throwing the yarn, is usually considered to be something like this, and I'll show you how most Americans do it. And that's, you insert the needle through the front loop, and then you pick the yarn up and you wrap it or throw it around the needle, and then you pull your stitch through and pop it off. So this is how a lot of people knit. My version of this is, instead of dropping, you know, the needle, picking up the yarn and throwing it like that, which is just a lot more steps, I think. My technique is to hold the needle between my middle finger and thumb in my right hand, and I hold the yarn up over the sort of the cuticle of my index finger, and I am able to add tension or release tension by simply moving my finger away and toward the needle. So I feel like I have a lot of control with my tension there, and I just bring the yarn through my fingers like this, and I don't squeeze here, but there is a little bit of tension just as that yarn comes across those three fingers. So this is my setup, and so my version of American is this. I insert the needle from right to left, but you see I never have to drop the needle and go pick up the yarn, and I don't need to involve my whole hand in this process. I just do this little motion with my finger, and so it's really very fast. However, so that's sort of American, and some people call that throwing the yarn. Let me show you what Continental is all about, and there are reasons why you should learn Continental, and I do Continental, particularly if you like ribbing or seed stitch, or you want to do multicolor work. Continental is going to be faster for you in the long run. We teach Continental here in the beginning knitting class, but I find that not everybody takes to it. So the bottom line here is you knit for pleasure, and it's not just about speed. So if you prefer the American, stick with it. There's nothing wrong with it. However, if again you like to work with multicolors, or you like seed stitch or moss stitch, or any stitch that alternates knits and purls, in the long run knitting Continental will be easier and a little more efficient. So with Continental, you're holding the yarn off the left index finger. For Continental, I create my tension. I actually wrap it around my pinky once and then pick it up again over that cuticle of my index finger, in this case though my left index finger, and then I hold my needle with my thumb, my middle finger, and I sort of brace it here with my pinky. And so Continental is this. Some people call it picking the yarn as well, because instead of wrapping the yarn around the needle, you're using your needle to go and sort of pick or grab the yarn. So I take the right hand needle, which, just as usual, insert it through the stitch from front to back or left to right, depending upon how you look at it. Now you're going to use the needle. It's almost like you're using your right hand to grab the yarn and pull it back through and pop it off. So you go in, you grab the yarn, pop it off. So this is Continental. Some people call this left-handed knitting, but actually you're using your right hand more. I'm sort of exaggerating my right hand motion here to show you that you're actually, the left hand is static. It's really not doing much but holding the yarn, and instead the right hand is going in and grabbing that yarn and bringing it through the needle. So that is Continental knit. All right, so here's purling done sort of the American way, which is you insert the tip of the right needle from back to front or right to left, depending upon how you want to look at it, and your yarn is to the front of the fabric, and then like an American knitter would pick the yarn up, wrap it around the needle, hold tension on the yarn while they pick the needle back up and bring the loop through. So this is how a lot of people knit or purl rather, American. My version of purling is again a little more efficient than that, in that I'm still holding the needle with my thumb and middle finger essentially. I have the yarn perched up over my right index finger and right at the cuticle, and give myself about a 1-inch lead, but again I can create tension by just how I alter my right index finger. And so this is my purl And it's a little bit faster. I never have to drop the needle. I never have to pick up the yarn. I just, again, use my right hand finger, almost kind of like a sewing machine, sort of throwing it around. So that's a slightly more efficient version of purling American style. But now let me show you purling Continental. And the advantage here is that the yarn stays, well, there are a couple of different ways of purling Continental, let me say that. In what I think is the most efficient Continental purl, I'm just backing out of stitches here while I talk, just so I can show you this row. So I think the more efficient Continental purl is one in which the yarn stays to the back of the fabric as if you were knitting. And the reason it's more efficient is because when you want to do things like seed and moss or ribbing, where you have to knit, purl, if you do it American, you have to, you know, bring the yarn to the back to knit, then you have to bring the yarn to the front to purl, bring the yarn to the back to the knit, and that's sort of a slow process. And for that reason, a lot of people don't enjoy actually knitting seed stitch or moss stitch or doing a lot of ribbing because of that. Whereas if you learned this Continental method of holding the yarn on the left index finger and to the back, you never have to move the yarn to the front of the fabric even when you're purling. So it makes stitches like ribbing and seed stitch really simple. So the purl, in the best fashion, I think, of Continental, is to keep the yarn in the back. You take the right hand needle behind the yarn and into the stitch as if to purl, right? So back to front. Now you're going to take your right hand needle. Again, most of the work is with your right hand. Your left hand is really just holding the yarn in place. So you're going to take the tip of your right needle, keeping this stitch on the needle. You're going to bring it back. So I call this sort of like up like a rocket, back. You're going to grab the yarn. You're going to bring it back to the front of the needle and then bring it through that loop and pop the stitch off. So let me show you that again. This looks crazy at first. I know, because that's how I felt when I first learned it, because I used to do a different Continental purl, which I'll show you in a minute. But there are real advantages to learning this one. So again, the yarn stays in the back. It never moves. The right needle comes behind the yarn and into the stitch as if you're going to purl. Then you take the tip of your right needle, kind of bring it up like a rocket, swoop back here and grab the yarn, bring it back to the front, sort of like your needle is doing almost a figure 8 kind of move. And now you want to bring this loop, you see that loop right there on this stitch, it's got to go through that. So this wrap of the yarn you've got to bring it through that loop, which is the stitch that you're trying to purl. So you bring it out. Now here's the key thing, which a lot of new Continental purlers get confused about. First, they forget to go behind the yarn going into the stitch. Then they'll grab it just fine, they'll bring it back to the front, and when they bring the stitch through to the back, instead of coming behind this yarn, they'll come in front of it and they'll take this yarn with it. You don't want to do that. You want to be sure when you go to pop this stitch off the needle that you come behind the yarn. Don't pull the yarn in front. Okay, so let me go through that a couple times slowly so you can see. Behind the yarn, in as if to purl, up like rockets, swoop back and grab the yarn in a counterclockwise fashion. Bring that yarn you've just grabbed back to the front, bring it out. I call this sort of scratching the belly. You take the tip of the right hand needle and sort of bring it along the belly of your left hand needle and bring your loop out to the back. Now here's where it's really important to be sure you take your right hand needle to the right of your the yarn that your left finger is holding, and now pop the stitch off. So behind the yarn, into the stitch as if to purl, up like rockets, swoop back, grab the yarn, bring it to the front, scratch the belly, and now pop the stitch off. Okay, it looks crazy and it looks like so many extra moves, but the beauty of it is if you want to start doing seed or ribbing, your yarn is back here, you can go grab it to knit, and now you can purl, and then you can knit, and then you can purl, and you just don't have to keep moving that yarn forward and back. Knit, purl, knit, purl. And so it ends up being much more fluid, but it takes a little practice. So let me just turn the row here, and now I'm going to show you an alternate purl that is Continental as well, but it doesn't offer you the same advantage as the purl I just showed you. And that's because you have to bring the yarn to the front. The other disadvantage I think it has is that, for me anyway, it really, well, let me just knit a couple of stitches. It hurts my fingers. It kind of stresses my left index finger, whereas this other Continental method I just showed you, even though it seems like an awful lot of motion and activity to get that stitch off, it doesn't hurt my finger. So in this Continental purl, you actually do bring your yarn forward. So your index finger has to bring the yarn forward, and this is where it tends to hurt my finger, is that you have to keep it straight and out of the way while you insert the tip of the right needle through that stitch as if you're going to purl. Then you bring it up and then wrap around and bring it back down again, and then pop the stitch off. So you're down in front, you kind of wrap the yarn by bringing this index finger straight up and then straight down again, and pop it off. So some people consider this a valid Continental purl, and it is. You end up with a purl stitch and it's perfectly fine, except that the whole point, I think, of learning to purl this other Continental way is that your yarn remains in the back, so it's right there when you want to knit, and then it's right there when you want to purl. And you don't have to keep coming forward and back and doing all of this with your left index finger, which is what tends to hurt my hand.